Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSP Mag 24. Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're listening to a new Redefining Cybersecurity podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought that we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. Let's look at how we can organize a successful information security program that integrates business culture with people, process, and technology to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com. Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Sean Martin, your host of the Redefining Cybersecurity podcast here on the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network, where I get to talk about all things cybersecurity in the business, hopefully in a way that we can operationalize all this crazy tech that we've built and spent money on, and in the guise of, or with an aim to actually not just protect the revenue, but actually generate growth for the company as well in a safe way. And many aspects and facets to talk about there today. We're going to be looking at the SIEM, security event and incident and event manager. I guess I should probably know the correct order of that, having built one for a big yellow company many years ago. But more specifically, we're gonna look at the role of AI within the incident response process, and more specifically within a SIEM, and that assumes it belongs there, which one of my guests suggests maybe it doesn't. The other might disagree, and so I'm thrilled to have Mick Douglas on and Dinis Cruz on. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
That's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Shout out to Casey Ellis. He was hoping to join us. He's caught up on travel. I'm sure he'd have some good insights. Maybe he'll throw some comments in on his social media when this comes out. But who knows? We might not get to all of it in the time we have allocated. We might need a second episode. So we'll see how this goes. Cool. This is inspired by a post that you put on. I think I first saw it on Twitter, and then also saw it on LinkedIn. So two places. And I think the interaction mostly came from, there's a lot on both platforms, but the interaction I saw that prompted me to say, let's talk about this, was on LinkedIn. So I'm going to include links to both of those. But Mick, you put this out there, and it basically says LLMs, AI don't belong in the SIEM. And boy, the fireworks started to flow. Take a moment, if you would, please, to share a bit about who you are and some of the things you're working on, and then very briefly the why you put that out there, and then we'll go to Dinis for a quick intro from him as well.
Sure. All right. So, hey, everybody. My name's Mick. I do a lot of defensive hacking. I have helped stand up MSSPs. I've been a client of MSSPs. I've been using SIEM since before we called them SIEM, back when they were called smart log aggregators in 2007. I remember Q1 Labs back before IBM bought QRadar. So I've been doing this a long while. And I want to be clear, I think that AI belong in the SOC, but they don't belong in the SIEM itself. And specifically, I see a lot of people talking about using LLM for various logs, and I'm really struggling with some of the stuff that I'm seeing people do. And unfortunately, a lot of it boils down to the fact that they don't know the environment, nor do they want to spend some time understanding the environment. So they just sprinkle this magic AI pixie dust on it, and everything gets suddenly better. And the short answer is that it doesn't, because IBM had the Watson AI plugin now for 10 years. And it's actually not a bad plugin, but for the level of effort it takes to set up and maintain, you can be doing a whole lot more interesting work in terms of configuring your like doing things like just basic stats. I mean, my goodness, in that thread, I keep on saying, sorry, I'm having an alert go off here that I gotta turn off.
It's IR alert.
So, no,
Is that your SIEM going, oi? That's your eye in your SIEM going, ooh, careful.
AI SIEM, don't talk bad about me. You're going to be the first against the wall. But, AI can help. But I don't think, again, LLM are not the tools for this. You'd get better return on your effort for doing things like just standard deviation analysis, least frequent occurrence, most frequent occurrence. These are set theory things. You don't need AI for that. I'll be happy to talk about where AI works great in terms of like helping build out your knowledge base. Like, my God, I love using LLM for like, hey, here's a couple bullet points of what we saw, and then it puts it into a narrative. Like, that's awesome. Use that. But all too often, I keep on seeing people just saying, oh, AI and all your threat detection becomes easy. That's not true. It's not needed.
Yeah, so a lot of great comments in there. So first of all, I'm Dennis Cruz. I actually sit on a whole bunch of different fences these days, which is really cool. So I'm the CISO of Holland & Barrett, so a UK retail organization. I run an amazing team. We run our own SIEM. We actually had to outsource for a little while, but now we run most of it. Although we work very close with a whole number of partners that provide us a little bit of that sort of extra SIEM side of things. I also work for a company called Glasswall, which basically makes files safe at scale for government. So it's quite interesting because it's we feed into SIEMs in that world, right? And then I'm also playing around with the idea of creating a bot for board members, and I call it the Cyber Boardroom. And you can play around with it. It's called the cyberboardroom.com. But that helped me a lot to understand how it works, where it adds value, etc. So the first thing I want to say is that, in a weird way, I think, and by the way, just to clarify, I would completely agree with you a year ago, before Gen AI, before ChatGPT, because I was the guy that would go through for a second and say, anybody here talks to me about AI, I'm walking out. Right? Because everybody said they did AI, none of them did properly. At best, they had machine learning, right? And I always felt that you guys much better spend the time doing exactly what you described. Clean up the data, make sure it's properly done, filter it out. Every vendor in a way, and I get it, because in a way, I think the market failed itself. I think the market tried to buy silver bullets. So the customer, tried to buy silver bullets, and the market go, hey, cool, look, since you're buying, here's a bunch of them, right? So the people that want to sprinkle AI on top of a Gen AI specifically, right, on top of the existing solutions, are the same ones that 6 months ago bought XYZ, a year ago bought the other thing, 2 years ago bought the other thing. Probably they are the teams that have 30 tools in their disposable, right, or 20 or whatever, right? And they can barely work. And I agree, in that world, to be honest, they probably even need more Gen AI than the other crowd, right? But for me, the big moment was when I realized that the new generation, and by the way, AI is still a fuzzy word because the thing doesn't think, right? It's just very clever. It's a very clever Google, but understands context, even at the level that we don't fully understand how it works, which should make you think that, hold on, we don't fully understand how actually ChatGPT really, really works, right? But it's not sentient, right? It's nowhere even close, right? This is about very good context. The key part for me was when I understood that it's the thing, right? Actually understood context and understood meaning. And more importantly, you can give it lots of complex data and it produced very accurate analysis of that data. The problem with most LLMs, in fact, I think all of them, is when you don't give it data and then you ask it things. and then he makes up stuff, right? But this guy recently, I said, it was very funny. He says, look, people hallucinate, right? Left, right, and center, right? Like the data is already hallucinates left, right, and center, right? So it's not that the LLMs is doing anything new. It's just they're doing it at a bigger level. The key points that I feel you made, which is we should be dealing with the basics, right? I kind of have a problem with the concept basics, because if they were basics, people would do it, right? The reality is that we have a lot of bad data in, a lot of mix, and then we get some meaning out, right? So I feel that the LLMs, the ability to have an engine that can understand data, that can understand context via prompt, produce an output, can basically help in all sorts of areas in that chain, right? And the key part here, and this was a big paradigm for me, shift, was to understand that what we're doing is we're moving a lot of the business logic into a prompt, right? So let me give you an example of an area that I feel where in SIEM, right? And by the way, I'm a massive fan of SIEM. We're gonna eventually talk a little bit more about where it can play a massive role in the business, right? But one of the biggest things I think everybody talks about was, a lot of data coming in, right? Too much stuff going in, too much noise into the system, right? So I feel that that's, for example, the first place where an LLM can make a big difference. Now, this is where I draw the line. I'm not saying that you feed the data to LLM, you take it out and put it into the SIEM. That's not what I'm saying, right? I think that's very dangerous. I think what you can do, right, is to use the SIEM to figure out what is the best ways to clean up this data, right? What is the best ways to analyze this data? And for example, build a parser that allows you to go from that amount of data to this amount of value, right? So you go from that amount of data, that amount of noise, this little amount of value, how you go from there to that amount of value, right? That you feed into your SIEM. So I think the first area, I would argue, but I don't go in bits, right? I think LLMs can make a massive difference in how you understand your data, in how you understand what's coming through, in how the humans and the engineers, right, who are making the SIEM better, can for the first time have a fighting chance. Because they could, for example, build custom parsers very easily. They can, for example, understand data structures much more easily because they have the inputs and the outputs. So where do you sit on that one, right? So using Gen AI, right, and I think let's distinguish all the other AIs that, like you said, were done before, because they were not really AIs. They were machine learning on steroids, right? That we can now describe intent, right? I can say, this is a feed from that type of environment, with this type of security requirements, with this type of risk, that it has this type of structure. Here's what it looks like. Here's what I would like to know of it. Or even better, like what are the things that is very good at this? Can you help me go from megabyte to megabyte to megabyte to 2K of data? And then you feed that to your SIEM.
So it's not in the SIEM.
I want to be clear, you can do that. You can. My question would be, what is the more practical approach for most organizations? For quite some time now, what we do with our clients when we're tuning their SIEMs, we will turn on query logging, and we will look to see what are the time horizons that they search, what are the data sets that they search, what are the fields that they're searching on, and then after 30 days, we have a very, very strong understanding of what they're using in their data.
Yeah.
And you could do that with an LLM, but I don't think you need to. And what we would then do is, after another month, like even a quarter of monitoring, then we'll have confirmation that this is the data set that is needed, and then purge it either further up at the log source or somewhere along the way before it gets into the SIEM. Because I'm totally in agreement with you that there is a lot of garbage in those.
So here's the thing, right? You could take what you just described, right, and you could build that using an LLM in the middle, right? And I want to clarify that most of the things I talk about here, I call it human enhanced or human-owned LLM results, right? And it's not about the black magic of dropping a ChatGPT in the middle and going, "Wee, it's going to work," right? It's about, so it's, for example, it's taking what you just described and making it in real time and doing it, because this is interesting, right? You said, I do this, but your time frames were 3 months to 6 months, right? I would argue that I would like to do what you just described daily, right? And this is the difference, right? The difference is you can now build that logic in a prompt, in a series of prompts, right? That literally start to analyze that data. And then what you can do, so this is how I would design the prompt for that. I would design the prompt to say, ChatGPT, blah, 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 here is the queries that the users are doing today, that they did yesterday, right? Here is what a SIEM, this is now a 20,000 word analysis, right, of what a good SIEM will look like, or what the data feeds will look like. This is what good looks like. So you can create a prompt where you can say, so what we're gonna do, here's the current situation, this is what just happened, here's the baseline, here's what they have, right? And then you want to query and going, right, what could they add to their SIEM, right? What is the two things they can do in the next couple of days that will make those queries that they just did more productive? And actually, what can you delete from the existing data set that they have, which you can also feed to the prompt? So you can see that what I'm doing here is I'm packaging a huge amount of business intelligence, right? Now, in a way, you have in your head, but at the moment, I would argue that when you go to organizations, you don't scale because you don't leave behind that thinking. So you do what exactly I described here, and you come in the end with a recipe. You say, oh, what you need to do is delete that data, up that feed, etc. What I'm saying is, let's leave that prompt that you created in your head behind so that they can do that, and then we can keep doing the more interesting stuff.
So there's a lot to unpack here. And again, what you're proposing is absolutely doable. And I'm just saying it's not needed. So all of that logic that I said about analyzing and looking at what logs are being looked at, that's a script. That is a leave behind artifact. That is done daily. In fact, for most of our clients, what we will do is hourly summaries. So I hear what you're saying, and there are potential use cases. One that you said a little bit ago was on parsers. That is a fairly interesting use case. But for data reduction, I don't think that you...
But let's follow your use case. That script that you created, who wrote it?
So that's a script that my crew wrote.
Your crew wrote it, right?
We have different implementations for the different SIEM platforms that we support.
That script is very tied to the inputs and the outputs. It has to be, right? By design, right? In the way it works, right? That script will break as soon as anything new comes along, and you won't have the flexibility. My point is that you should not be giving a script. You should be giving a prompt that creates the script, right? That evolves the script, that maintains the script, right? Also in a continuous way. And the reason is your script won't have intent. Your script will have...
AI doesn't have intent, though. You keep on assigning these terms to AI that doesn't follow. The AI, an LLM, does not understand the prompt, and it doesn't understand the response. I'm assuming, just for the sake of argument, you're talking about vectorized databases. What AI are doing are using proximal vectors to understand how close something is to another thing.
Yes, but
no understanding at all. And the problem that I worry about is that it's a lot easier for somebody to hose up a prompt than it is to have a script. And I want to push back very firmly against the notion that the script somehow is fragile. The script is consuming the query logs that come from the SIEM. So the vendor would have to be the one that changes what their query logging structure is, or somebody would have to turn off query logging. I think AI are very cool. And yes, you can use AI in the way you're describing. I just feel that what you're doing is using a Formula One race car to go down the street when a regular family car would be more than sufficient.
So
let me ask this question, because I want to bring it. We're kind of, which I love, by the way, and I'm sure we'll get back here very quickly into some of the weeds here. But I want to look at the broader definition of a SIEM, and what are we pulling in from which sources? What are we looking at in that data? And because I can envision a world where we have data from attack paths like MITRE and that kind of thing, and threat intelligence feeds and other things that we can continue. AI potentially could continue to analyze and quote unquote learn from, and do it in a way where a query doesn't have to take place, right? The machine could constantly reevaluate that script against new information. So I guess what I want to ask is, what is the definition of a SIEM in its current form? What it needs to be? Does it need to broaden for it to become available for your LLM use cases? What do you think?
I think that and this is something that I think Dinis and I are on very tight alignment, is I think that industry-wide, we need to start thinking more creatively of how we use our SIEM. One of the things that makes me really sad is, back when I did business analysis before I became a consultant, the amount of data that a SIEM has, most lines of business would do shameful and horrible things to have that sort of visibility. And for a lot of my clients, I love to use a SIEM in a very novel way. Like one of my favorites, if you do any kind of retail or transactional stuff on your website, your SIEM is going to be monitoring your production web server, or at least I hope to God it is.
Yep.
And the same logs that you're consuming to see attack indicators can also be used to show health of the business. And for many of my clients, if, let's say they've got a shopping cart, if too few elements are going into the shopping cart and being bought, an alert gets generated, but not to the SOC. Instead, it goes to the marketing team and says, hey, start driving eyeballs to this environment. And the SIEM, with the visibility that it has, we should be squeezing that thing dry. Yep. Now, meta way of doing it is asking an LLM, hey, here's the telemetry we have. What sort of types of value add can we do with it? But that's not inside the SIEM. That's about the SIEM.
As part of the SIEM infrastructure. So I think we've found an agreement. I would even double down, and I think SIEM, of all the stuff we do in security, is probably one of the biggest missed opportunities that we have, right? Like in security, we have, the thing that is unique to cybersecurity is that, and I would argue when a good security team operates in an effective way, is that we're the only team that can speak to everybody, get data from everybody at all levels of the organization, all the way from strategic to business to executive to functional, every single team. And by the way, organizations don't speak to each other, right? Like organizations are these massive schizophrenic freaking entities, right? That half of them don't like each other, half of them hate each other. Even when they like each other, they don't collaborate because the things are sometimes engineered in ways that the reward system is different. We in the middle are the ones who have to pick up the pieces, because if there's an incident, we almost the attackers don't care, right? The attackers don't care that this division doesn't talk to that division, right? They'll go right through it. So we have an insane asset, which is we can get data from everybody, right? And even more interesting, we can process it. And I'm going to say out of the bat that if a team doesn't have an engineering function, then they might start there. Like literally, that's your biggest problem. Forget everything else. You need engineers, you need developers, you need to build stuff, right? You need to be able to do that. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how much you spend on tools, right? And that's another topic for another thing. I really want to pick up your point of what the SIEM is, right? I actually think that there's multiple layers of SIEMs, and I almost view this in a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional way, right? Like I think there's the first, maybe you can call the virtual data lake, not data lake, I don't like that term. You have almost like the sum of every raw piece of data that you have access to, right? And you collect it. So that's fundamentally is your potential SIEM data, right? And that should be massive, right? And I'm a big fan of taking data and dumping it into a storage, right? And then coming out of it, right? So that's the first, I would say, SIEM element that can come from it, right? Then what we do is we take that and we feed it to environments, which is what we tend to call SIEMs. But the reason I want to make a distinction is because I feel that we should almost have 3 SIEMs in sequence. We should have the top big one, right, who has the potential of all the data, which can be used for some type of analysis. Then you have a created one, which is already a massaged version of this, where you go from this amount of data to that amount of data. And that already has a lot of signals. And I think what we should even do next is take that and process it even further to create what the analyst has in front of it. And this is where I feel that the analyst and the data that you should see on a day-to-day should be a very small subset of your SIEM data set, right? And should be very focused as making sure that you have high signals. But it should have the ability to load data on demand. So it's kind of like this idea that you want to zoom in, and as soon as you zoom in, you go, oh, give me a second, let me load up, okay? Now, is this what you want? Oh, let me load up. And then you have the ability to go back in time. And the bit I don't think a lot of teams do is that these transitions have to be codified, because you need to be able to view it as code. So you need to be able to almost lose the value in your final data set, because that final data set is just a transformation of what it is. And the point that Mick said about the consumers, I think the biggest mistake we do is where we don't open up the SIEM data to other teams. And this is one of the challenges I keep giving my team, is that, and it's not easy because you need to solve a lot of things, right? It's very easy when your SIEM is a walled garden and everybody that's in there is very highly trusted, but it means that you cheated because you haven't solved the problem of how do you share data in a secure, in an effective way. But the reality is that if the people paying for the SIEM, I say architecture, right, foundations, is a security team, that is a failure, because the marketing team, the business team, the development team, every team in the business should get value from your SIEM, because like Mick was saying, your SIEM has all the data that they need, right, to do a lot of the analysis. And the interesting thing, it can do a lot of correlations, because what the SIEM should be doing, and I saw these guys once describing amazingly, in a way, the SIEM should be doing a judo move. So it's not about one system to rule them all, which is, again, the mistake that everybody does, because it's a bit like, hey, we have 5 standards, let's create the big standard, and now we have 6 standards, and then let's create the Uber standard, you have 7. So I also think that the clever SIEM is the SIEM that, in a way, leverage other data lakes, leverage other systems, so it doesn't go against the weather. Oh, you have Elastic, you have Datadog, you have this, you have Chronicle. Cool. So you feed that in and you build connectors. So you can almost, from your SIEM, is also you shouldn't care where the data come from. What you care is that you can connect the dots, right, in an effective way. The problem, I think, and when I drill down, I think there's 2 fundamentals, is that we don't expose the data to others, so we don't get more eyeballs. Like, Mick was saying that, actually you might have the marketing team picking up an attack because they didn't want to pick up an attack. They just realized that there was an impossible journey, right? And suddenly, what the hell? Like, the profitability just went off the charts or down the charts, right? And they think something is wrong and ask, oh shit, that was an attack, right? I think that's one element. I think the other element is that we create puppies, right, or pets, in the whole pets versus cat analogy, where most of our SIEMs are the gigantic pets, right? They are one-offs, right? You go to any team and you say, if I deleted your entire SIEM, yeah, everything, configurations, blah, 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 how fast can you rebuild it? And I can actually argue that most of them cannot even get anywhere close the way I now. And that means it's a freaking gigantic pet. Right, and that means that they have no change control. There's no automation. Everything is really dangerous. So the amount of innovation that happens in that pet is very limited, because also it's very fucking dangerous, right? You do the wrong query, you blow up half your data, right? So that's why I like this, going back, I like this principle where you have your data sources throughout the organization. Some you collect, some you get. Then you have transformation, and then you democratize the asset, right? Access to it. And I go back that Gen AI is now a key tool of making this happen, because it allows workflows that before were very, very hard to do. And that's my vision for where the SIEM is supposed to be, right? It should be.
So I want to pull on this, and maybe Mick may have some thoughts on this, of course, because before we recorded, I brought up the idea of the team, and is the team capable of utilizing a SIEM? And I think I think the team is capable in the pure security operations perspective. But when you describe it as you just did, Dinis, and pulling all these data points together and all these systems together, there's no way a human is going to connect all those dots. And I think we'll need...
Think of it this way. Even the most complex river system just starts with a single spring. And what a lot of organizations try to do is they try to solve the entire river basin. And instead, what you really should do, especially if you're just starting on your SIEM journey, or you find that your SIEM deployment is like in a really weird state, just be like, you know what, let's just drop everything, forget the noise. What's one thing that if we really nail, it makes our life just a little less painful?
Yeah,
you're not looking for perfection, just you're looking to make it a little better. Find that one thing and then start walking that log through the system. And you're going to learn a ton about how things are set up. You're going to learn a ton about how other data sets should also be set up. And you're not, the best SIEM deployments that I've seen, they try to have a continuous improvement model, but their continuous improvement goals are shockingly low. Most like serious SIEM players are looking for 1% improvement per week if they're very aggressive. Some as light as 1% a month if they're very mature. But if you think about that, like 1% a week, you're looking at about a 50% performance improvement over a year, which is insane. So you need to start reframing what a SIEM is. And a big problem, Dinis, I'm in big agreement with you on your other points, but one that I also need to add, or I would like to add to your list, is that the way we're selling SIEM solutions is wrong.
But that's why you need the Gen AI, man, because you need.
It's not the Gen AI. It's a turnkey ready ecosystem. No. It needs a lot of tuning.
No, it's the point you're making. The selling is not just selling; is the usage. And this is where I've been playing with the cyber boardroom, where the big thing that I realized that for the first time I can scale is how do you create messages that are targeted to each person. Right. So, for example, when you say we need to sell the SIEM, well, actually, what we need to do is we need to make sure the output of the SIEM is understandable and is in context to the recipient. So that means, if you think about it, that if I ask you to say, hey, I want to take the data from the SIEM and I want to create it that is targeted to this person, that team, that language, that culture, that environment, right, that workflow, it'll be fucking, dude, you're crazy, right? There's no possible you can do it. That's now possible, right? It's possible because, again, you can describe that in a prompt, and then the communication can be done, right? And you can still own that transformation. But I want to go quickly back to the point that Sean made, because I think that goes to the heart of all this, right? Is I think explainability, right? And I would even argue version control is super important. Like the idea that you have something over there, doesn't matter a SIEM, a person, a tool, a script, that data goes over the fence and they come back with a solution. Ta-da, I found it, right? Like it's a bit like you send the soldier in, the guy comes back with the freaking, I found it, right? I found the magic thing. That's the opposite that we want, right? The thing about SIEMs and this is about scalability. It's about force multipliers, right? How do you get a new engineer, a new person to have super capabilities, right? That is able to operate at a massive level. And the only way you do that is it kind of take the example that Mike was saying, but I would describe it like explainability of what happens is about increasing abstraction layers, right? So also, more and more abstraction layers. But what it means is every abstraction layer is highly documented. So what it means that the analysis should get simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler the higher you go up, and should require less and less and less domain expertise, right, to act on it. But what we need is to make sure that that whole chain is well documented. And I'm a big fan of trying to figure out how to do even with version control. So that means that I'm going
to jump in here quickly because this goes to the opposite of what Mick just described, at least in my simple mind. Mick's saying, find that important thing and trace it back down.
Yeah, but you can do that.
You're just describing all the feeds. And I don't know, I'm just trying to think that I'm trying to be on the side of LLMs belong here somehow, in that exploring things, discovering things that you might not
and translating
naturally
things.
have here.
But the question is the jump, right? Like you cannot go from this amount of complexity to that negative solution. That never works, right? And that's not what you want. What you want is a chain of analysis, right? And each analysis, because that's what we do, right? We take a bunch of feeds, we consolidate it, we create this, then we analyze. But that whole correlation, the whole abstraction layers has to be documented, and that's what we want to scale. And I think, Mick, correct if I'm wrong, but I think the case you're saying is that start in one place, right? Start in one place and say, I want to make this better. Because the other really cool thing about our worlds is that we operate in real world stuff, right? So I'm a big fan of taking P3 incidents, running MSP1s, or real world. Like, it's almost like we know this happened, right? Look, the user told us that this has happened, right? Now, we couldn't see it. Now let's understand. Let's look at everything we failed so that one little thing that we know we missed, right? So it's almost like, I like when you know the solution already, right? You know that this happened. You know that this alert occurred. You know that this thing is there, right? Can you now just zoom in on everything that is missing or is there, right? So we can get that connection. And then that allows us to have one thing that you can then keep evolving. But I think the LLMs bring a huge amount of explainability into the loop when we get it there.
Mick, thoughts? I mean, I can keep going with my thought on this, because I believe that if you start with something that you know you want to tackle, you're starting with a premise or an understanding of how you've done it already. And I guess what I'm trying to point to is that you might find something new in the data by looking at it differently with the help of technology and more specifically Gen AI, that may say that path, that starting point isn't the right starting point. That path doesn't really matter. These are really the things that matter to whatever it is you're trying to figure out.
Yeah, and maybe I'm arguing in a way that's unfair. What you're talking about is just the investigative process, whether it's AI or a canned Yara that you run. It's looking for some anomaly. And what's more interesting to me is not when the AI gives me expected output or when the canned Yara gives me expected output. What I love is when things go sideways. And like, why is this thing behaving differently and unexpected? And then you can start beginning your investigation, because all we're looking for is anomalies. I don't really care what tool you're using. I just care that we can find anomalies. Like, here's another way to think of it. All the different data sets that we're dealing with are just slices, right? Stacks and stacks of slices. And what you've got are two complex curve shapes. So certain occurrences happen, that's anomalies. Above that, that's alerts, and you need to investigate those. The hope that a lot of people have is that AI can help define what those curve spaces are. And that'd be great if they could. The problem is that the LLMs are not aware of what controls you have. And if you have a good asset inventory, you might be able to train or build a model that's appropriate to your environment. But like out of the box, they're not going to know that. You're going to have to do some real hellacious work in order to have them understand what your environment looks like. And that's where I think a lot of the lessons that I learned the bitter way back in the LLM days, when we first started doing things like Markov chains, we thought that was going to be an amazing win. And it helped in a lot of ways. Machine learning is a good thing. AI is a good thing. It's just, I contend that for most SIEM specific, for most organizations, we're not yet at a spot where they need Gen AIs.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think that if people, again, want to throw all the data to Gen AI and then get the answer, first of all, we don't have any, that has the amount of capacity, right? I don't think that's the right way. The way I look at it is that I want to use Gen AI to have the least amount of data in the SIEM with the most amount of meaningful data in the SIEM, to be able to communicate effectively, to be able to have explainability left, right, and center, and actually to teach and train. Like the thing that I remember that the biggest challenge we have is that there's that curse, right, where you train somebody to be a SIEM operator. By the time they're really good, they want to leave because now they have a lot of great other skills, right? And that doesn't scale when it's a zero-sum game. What I think is more interesting is to, again, use the Gen AI capability to create learning environments, to create simulations. So you can do that. So for example, like it's very easy these days, and assume that we're going to get better and better platforms to do this, right? So for example, I could take a dump from a SIEM or the outputs, and I could create a simulated game for a new cyber analyst, right? And say, by the way, this is the kind of alerts that you're going to get. And you can create simulated environments much better than anything else we had before, right? You can even say, here's the expected answers. Now start asking questions, and now teach the person, right? But teach them into context, right? So, and that's what I feel that it's almost like it's more like, Jarvis, the good one in Tony Stark's world, right? It's kind of like, that's what it is, right? It's not the uber duper, like it's almost like we then ask Jarvis to sing and dance and to compose things and going, well, he hallucinates. That's not what it is. This is about giving a mini Jarvis to every single person, right? And have them that insane ability to suddenly be really good and have access to really good environments. And I even see this as a generation of bots, right? So it's almost like, imagine when you start, you get given almost like, okay, this is level 1 SIEM, right? You get a very small bot, you get small data, learn. And then as you get better, you have access to more and more data sets, more and more complexity. And the key point I was trying to explain before, Mick, is that I feel that a lot of the stuff that we do, we have the prompt in our head, but we leave behind the photograph of that output. I think what's really interesting is to start to live behind the thinking behind it. Mm-hmm. And the power of the thinking, i.e. the prompt, is that it's cheaper by orders of magnitude to modify that or to adapt that, right, than it is the code that, and the structure we leave behind. Right? So you can think of this as a sequence of prompts. And the beauty of this is that if you start to go into a world where you have prompt after prompt after prompt after prompt, that every input and output is reverse engineered and version controlled, you can then, every time there's a bad output or something that doesn't make sense, you can go back, right? And you can go, oh, okay, where did my script fail or my prompt failed? And then you tweak it, right? And then you learn the ones that have high confidence, the ones that have low confidence. But I feel that world allows us to get a huge amount of more value from the SIEM, and then we can communicate upwards and downwards, right, in a much more effective, I would say, language and context, because again, the context is a prompt, right? If you see what I mean, like,
I'm following what you're saying, and I even agree in a large part with what you're saying. I guess the main concern that I have for the foreseeable future is what you're talking about would be very computationally expensive. And
those guys already solved the problem, right? Because if you think about it, the Gen AI crowd, and they're losing money with it, but it doesn't matter. In fact, that's coming down very quickly, right?
Well, I get that. And I've actually...
That's the computation expensive part, right? Is the logic.
That. And I am working with small AI. I've got a project that I'm hopefully going to be open sourcing here in the not too distant future, and it runs on a laptop. Yeah. It runs really nicely. Yeah. But even that amount of chain of prompts, to coin a phrase, that would be a fairly expensive process.
Look at that cool model. Imagine you being able to describe, imagine I'm telling this, you now have a micro LLM SIEM or agent running on your devices, and you can describe it what you want.
Practicality. That's what... Yeah.
We know that far, man. We know that far. Apple's just releasing a new thing with the open source. If you look at the innovation on the open source LLMs, right, we're getting to the point where you're going to run it everywhere, right? And here's the thing I've been playing with, right? The interesting part, and Amazon actually had a good gotcha on this. Microsoft had a good gotcha with Copilot. Top marks who come up with that one, because it's a Copilot. But where Amazon, I think, got it right is the concept of foundation models, FMs. Mm-hmm. So I actually think the name of the game is not on customizing models. I actually think customizing models is fucking dangerous because we still don't understand how the hell that works, right? I think what you want is to have foundation models that become really good, that you understand very well how they behave, how they operate, what they do, and even the cost matrix of those models. And then you build prompts and workflows on top of it. And in a way, what you want is to run the cheapest possible model to achieve the same goal that you want. So let's say that you want to have something that analyzes, Splunk logs or what's it called, PCAPs, or the output of a freaking AV or EDR or whatever, Zscaler, whatever tool you've got, right? And you want something to analyze it. Eventually, you should be able to say, well, I don't need ChatGPT for that. I probably need 3.5. I probably need 2. I probably need Llama. I probably need this guy here. And then eventually the model becomes smaller until you find, the sweet spot, right? And that's why I'm saying, so the foundational models becomes that ability to supercharge, right, an analysis where, and this is what I want to clarify. When I say intent, I'm not saying the intent of the AI. I'm saying the intent of the analyst that wrote the prompt, right? So when I write a prompt, I have an intent, right? And the intent might be, I want you to look at this, look at that, collect this, map this. Here are the scores. Now give me these outputs. That's what I mean by intent, right? The Gen AI is just a great way that I can explain this in English or in JSON or in whatever format I want. That before was, it's like before I needed £500,000 of engineering to do that, right? And every time I wanted to change, I had to go back to my engineering and change everything. Where now you can modify the prompt, run it again, right? And that's very different. It's like code, data is now code. And we need to start treating data and descriptions and prompts as code. So it's like another abstraction layer, right? You go from assembly to C++ to Python to prompts, right? So, there you go. You write your scripts in Python. I'm saying start writing your scripts in prompts, right? And then have toolkits around it, right? But then the explainability is super important because black magic has no space, especially in SIEMs. I would argue that anything that happens that you can't explain is a P1, right? It's like the freaking Air Force, man. Like a door blows up of a plane, they can't understand it, they ground the fleet. That's it. Like there's no ifs, there's no buts. The same thing here. We should have a case where a signal comes along, we don't understand how it works, the LLM did something, we don't get it, fucking ground it. Everybody, P1, solve that problem, right? And that, I think, gives you a lot more confidence in the outputs and a lot more explainability at all these layers, right? So you don't have black magic where you have these layer, and then you can even use the LLMs to explain what each of the layer is doing. And I want to do this with source code, by the way, because for me, I love the fact that people talk about LLMs hallucinate. I'm like, dude, our fucking source code hallucinates, right? Nobody understands the products that we build, right? They tell you like software above a certain amount, you can't find anybody who actually understands how that thing
not true. I always get upset when folks say that because it can be very expensive to decompose how an AI came to a solution. But we absolutely know how AI work. We know how they function. It's just
no, we don't.
It's economically costly to go back, especially with like neural net AI, to figure out how it came to understand a particular element. But what you're talking about, there's actually a bit in a book called the alignment problem. And they talk about how that's not true. Like we know what they do. We've known how these AI.
Well, then explain to me, right? Like, 'cause I haven't seen a good explanation. How does ChatGPT, how Gen AI, where's the reasoning part of it?
Because there's no reasoning. It's all vector. Like let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple, okay? So the best solution is, okay, you have some prompt, and usually that goes into something like a vector database. And all vectors is just a fancy way of numerically representing some
words. It's a CSV file, right?
And it doesn't even matter what those numbers are. As long as you're consistent and you have a uniform approach for how you vectorize whatever text you're using, you're going to wind up with this vector space where all these vectors are living in this database. Yeah. And then when a prompt comes in and you say, hey, I want to know this information, that prompt, like that you enter into like a ChatGPT or a Bard or whoever, gets vectorized. Yeah. And that vector gets plopped into that vector space and it says, oh, these two vectors right here are the ones that are closest to that particular prompt, and then starts using that as its content.
I get it, but that's layers, right?
So there's no reasoning. It can't reason. All it is a database lookup.
Well, that's where I draw the line, because in the past, I could always see how most AIs was like that. It's very binary. But I'll give you an example. You can go to an LM these days and say, here are 10 questions, right? Here's a knowledge base, right? I want you to write, right, questions. I want to create a quiz. In fact, I want a quiz with 7 questions or with 5 questions based on that data set. And I want you to run as a host. Now, think about it. Everything here is instructions, right? Like the only way to pull this off, right, is there has to be layers upon layers of intent, of logic, of mappings, right? And even like you say, do this with humor, do this with dry, do this in bullet points, all those guidance, my understanding is at the moment, what we know is that give enough compute, give enough vectors, give enough layers, there's layers that exist at the top that we don't fully understand, right, that make that happen. But look, dude, okay, but point me to, right, because my understanding is that for example, the way we can explain compute today doesn't exist on a Gen AI model, because there's layers in there that were created with almost brute forcing of content and learning that we today are not able to explain how the output is created.
Yeah, so there are some elements of this right now that are kind of strange. I will admit, like some of the stuff, like I've talked about vectors, for instance. A lot of times I'm being very broad here, I am not personally involved. I'm just talking about AI hackers and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that we're uncovering is that we don't know what the optimal vectorization process is. Yeah. So if you have, say, a reference document that you want to be able to ask questions, how do you represent that in vector space in a way that is consumable? You could make an entire page a single vector. You could make a single word on the opposite side. You could make a single word a vector. But if you go that small, the vectors aren't going to be really helpful. You're going to get really weird answers. But if you go a full page, you're also probably going to get weird answers, because a page would typically contain multiple thoughts, multiple ideas. And what you're really trying to have is a way that your vector contains a bite-sized, complete idea. But how do you know what the proper vectorization is to do that? Because unless you have somebody saying, oh, this to this, that, vectorize that, and nobody's got the time to do that.
Well, not just the time.
So
I think we need
something
that
I'm playing with is having multi-vectorization of a particular data set.
And Sean, I want to bring a topic that I think is super important here, which is part of the other reason why I really, so just to be clear, I'm a big fan. I think LLMs can modify the way, not just SIEMs, but a lot of security space. The thing I would say is people don't put the LLMs in line, right? And I tell you one thing, this is, for the ones who've been in security for a long time, this is like SQL injection on freaking steroids, right? Like we went from, or buffer overflows, on fucking another level, right? Because we went from data streams that we didn't understand what it was. Then we realized, oh, maybe copying data from A to B is not a good idea. Maybe concatenating string queries in databases is not a good idea, right? We went from, okay, now we understand that this bit of data is malicious. We're going to parse it, analyze it. And we, let's say SQL injection. We went from raw SQL concatenation to nice parameterized queries, separation of code and data, all that jazz, right? Now we have the prompts, right? And the reason I'm very worried about prompts in line, not prompts to analyze other things, right, is because I think we're going to see an insane type of attacks that we have not even dreamed on, right? So as we get better, like I think we're going to have cases where people are going to do jailbreaking. It's not even jailbreaking. They're going to start telling the freaking models to completely change their behavior. It's almost like you have to imagine that we have no evidence that you cannot, through a prompt, actually completely change. It's a bit like you have SQL injection that patches not just the query, but patches the code at whatever level you want, right? Imagine a SQL injection query that you're patching SQL Server or SQL themselves, or the kernel, or the server, or the OS, right? So I think putting things in line, that making decisions based on prompts that come from hostile environments, which, by the way, SIEMs are, right? It's borderline crazy, right? And I don't think, and that's why when people say, "Oh, I just feed the data to LLM and let it do the analysis," I'm like, dude, wait until you see the kind of exploits, because then, remember we said that we are the epicenter, right? We become one of the best places to attack, right? You freaking attack, you pop the SIEM, right? You pop the SIEM, you pop the organization, right? So again, that's why I like to put LLMs to augment analysis, but also more and more, I want to find ways that everything the LLM does is version controlled. And it's almost like we need to use LLMs into analysis, that it's almost like code is still the best thing we have. Data is still the best deterministic things we have. So the LLMs should be creating the code and should be creating the data, right? But it's all version controlled, right? Or else, you're going to see some crazy shit, When people put a prompt, it's a bit like, the cool SQL injection that you put a payload in a form field that was executed 4 streams down when it actually hits the final thing that literally transverses your entire organization, even companies, and suddenly that simple SQL query that you put in, or that payload that you put in, is then loaded up, or let's say, JavaScript injection, right? It's finally loaded up on some SIEM analyst dude that is actually reviewing the data, and then that pops the whole organization, right? Because you put the payloads in the failed password attempt, right? Or the username, right? And guess who sees all the failed usernames is the people who are analyzing failed usernames, right? So I think prompt injection is going to be massive, right?
It is going to be a problem. There's no two ways around it. Anybody who says otherwise, I think, is delusional. Yeah. The other thing that I'm worried about too is that we're kind of training people to trust these machines more than they should be. Yeah. And, you may have heard of that GIGO, and a lot of people think it stands for garbage in, garbage out. With the realm of AI, what I'm worried about, and this comes from a buddy of mine, John Strand, he says it's garbage in, gospel out. And
but that always happens, right? Is that different than what we have today?
I've seen so many times when people just blindly trust the output of these models, of these tools. And, I think that they can be great force multipliers, but you need to treat them as like interns, like sometimes they give you delightful and very meaningful insights.
Other times, we have that problem already today.
So right? Crazy.
But we have that problem today, right?
And I'm going to say we do, and because we're getting close to the time here. I'm happy to have another session, but what I want to do is, because one of the things that was sticking in my mind was false positives. You kind of touched on that a little bit there, Mick. And so what I want to do as we wrap here, if you were to pick one thing that the SIEM could do in 2024 with AI, let's assume you put your fears away for a moment and some of the things you talked about. I want to know what's the area in the SIEM that would benefit from AI in 2024. Who wants to go first? Where would you spend your money making the SIEM better with AI?
The SIEM vendors will never ever do this, and they'll actively try to stop it. But I do feel that not LLM, but other AI tools would be exquisitely helpful in reducing the gigs per day, the events per second, whatever your license model is. Those tools inside a SIEM would be is it at telling you what the noise is that can be cut down. Yeah. They have perverse economic incentives to make sure that never ever gets deployed.
But that's changing, by the way. There's some SIEM providers who are playing on that game, and I think the market will change very quickly.
I would love that. Anyone like the market is way open for disruption.
Well, I can name them. I say Chronicle plays that game, right? Chronicle says, "Fucking just dump everything. We won't charge you for that."
Cribble's playing some really cool stuff.
Exactly. Right. So I would actually echo Sean what Mike said. I think the place where I would use LLMs in 24 is to clean up your data, and I would say that reducing the gigabytes of injection is not the objective, is the side effect of having better signals, where you can use the LLMs to understand better what you got and to help you with the parsers, with the data, with the mapping. So you reduce the amount of noise in a way that you get to the SIEM, so you improve what you get on the other side, right? So, and this is where I would go. Right? So the reason I say LLMs belong to the heart of the SIEM is because they can play that role of making the SIEM more efficient in ways that before we couldn't scale, right? Like in before, it would be impossible for me to go to my team and say, hey guys, I would like to see an analysis of those 5 data feeds for value, for this, for that. What are you ingesting? What's in there? Explain me every single field. Explain me everything that's going on. It would be impossible, right? Now you can feed that to an LLM. You can feed that to the environment. So I would say use the LLMs to make the SIEMs more productive. And now maybe going full circle. And yes, some of those things you can do, you don't need a freaking Gen AI for that, right? Like you can just apply common sense. But I think there's a diminishing returns that you hit if you're not powered by your Gen AI, rocket ships, right? And as you hit them, that's when you apply the Gen AI. So make your SIEM and your data and your team more productive. I feel that's where I would put the Gen AI in the mix.
I love it. You guys are amazing. I had my popcorn here.
We went on some rabbit holes, but I think we come out of it.
I tried to pretend that I knew what was going on half the time, but you guys are really cool. I appreciate all your perspectives and insights, and clearly you have your fingers in all the good fun stuff that I don't get to deal with anymore, which is
by the way,
a bummer in some instances.
I'm hiring, right? And I'm hiring lots of freelancers. If anybody has time and they want to join a really great model, so I'm doing the plug. So as long as you can work through Upwork, we can hire talent, right? So I'm building the best possible team, I can assemble. So that's my plug. So if you guys want to do this kind of stuff, right? Ping me. We'll get you guys on board, right? And then we'll see if it works or not.
Love it. We always need more analysts and people in the SOC.
And more diverse, right? Actually, final little thing. This is a great opportunity for more diverse candidates from other industries to join cybersecurity because it's a freaking shit show, right? Like we need better thinking. We need talent. We need people with fresh perspectives. So neurodiversity, women, this is the best time to join in, right? Because, it's so ripe for disruption and we need better thinking. We need new, fresh batch of talent. It's like the way I look at it, you take a PhD person, right? Or you take somebody who worked at the local restaurant, right? Like I build an amazing incident response people, like literally work from home, moms from Wales, right? Middle of nowhere, took the kids to school, were content writers. They become some of the best incident responders I ever had because they're logical, they have common sense, they understand. So we need a lot more talent, right? To join in our industry. And I think now is a great time to do it because, again, Gen AI allows those individuals to supercharge their learnings in a way that in the past I just couldn't, right? But now you can, and I think it's a great opportunity. So let's bring on the talent.
And with that, I want to thank you both, and Mick, I want to thank you as well. You're always thinking and sharing, and clearly this conversation was spurred and spawned from that post that you made. So keep doing the good work. Keep sharing and getting us all to think and getting us to talk to each other. It's really cool. I always enjoy having you on the show. Dinis, you as well. Good to have you on again too. And who knows? Maybe we'll do another one. Maybe Casey will get to join me next time.
Casey in, right?
We'll get the whole how do you hack the system and how do you disclose stuff properly from him. But anyway, for now, thank you both. And of course, we'll link to the posts and please do share. This is a conversation that needs to go around for sure. And I suspect people will have their own thoughts on whether it belongs or doesn't belong, and if so, where or where not. So please comment on the threads the thread that Mick posted and on our post on ITSP Magazine. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sam.
Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com. Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity with Sean Martin, part of the ITSP Magazine podcast network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share this show and itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand with our conversations, you can sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.
Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSP Mag 24.